Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a whole stack of sources, articles, historical accounts, you name it all, focusing on one, well, really remarkable life. Adoniram Judson.
That name might ring a bell for some. He's often called a pioneer American missionary.
Exactly. And his story is this intense mix of big ambition early on, these completely unexpected changes in direction, facing just immense suffering, but also finding this profound sense of purpose that, well, it really left a lasting impact.
That's right. So our goal today is to unpack that journey. We'll look at the challenges he faced, his kind of surprising conversion story, and the legacy he left behind.
And we really want to pull out lessons from his life that might resonate with you, especially if you're, say, a high school senior, thinking about college, looking at your future, trying to figure things out. Judson's life isn't just dusty history. It's a powerful story about grappling with big questions and facing down some truly incredible odds.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Adoniram Judson, he was born back in 1788. Grew up in a pretty devout home. His dad was actually a Congregationalist pastor.
Yeah, which was, a major part of the religious scene in New England at the time. That was his background.
And by all accounts, he was incredibly bright, like really intellectually gifted from a young age.
The sources mention things like being great at math, knowing Greek and Latin really well by age 10, even interested in navigation as a teen. Seems like he had a mind geared for, well, big things.
Totally. A star student, went to Brown University, graduated valedictorian in 1807. But interestingly, while he was there, something shifted.
He drifted away from his faith.
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. Fell in with some skeptical friends, started questioning the beliefs he grew up with.
And started looking at totally different careers, right?
Yeah.
I read he was seriously considering theater. That's a big jump from his dad's world.
A huge shift. So he graduates pretty convinced that, religious faith isn't his path. But then something pivotal happened. This was even before he came back to faith.
Oh, what was that?
A really sad event, actually. A close friend of his, also a skeptic, died very suddenly. And that death just completely shook Judson. It kind of forced him to face the limits of that skeptical view. He wasn't suddenly a Christian again, not yet, but he knew he couldn't just stay an unbeliever either. That certainty, he thought, he had just felt hollow.
Man. So he's wrestling with this, right? Shaken up by losing his friend.
Yeah.
And that leads him somewhere kind of unexpected.
Exactly. He decides to enroll at Andover Theological Seminary.
Wait, before becoming a Christian, isn't seminary for training pastors?
Usually, yeah. It was definitely unusual. He went there almost academically, you could say, seeking answers, trying to really understand Christianity's claims because of the questions his friend's death raised.
So he's intellectually digging in first. And the sources say it didn't take long, like a couple months there, and he surrendered his life to the Lord.
That's right. A pretty quick turnaround after all that searching and doubt.
Okay, so he's had this conversion.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately, something else starts stirring. A different kind of ambition.
Yeah, a sense that his life was meant for something else entirely. Not theater, not navigation. Two specific things he read really lit a fire under him.
What were they?
One was this sermon, The Star in the East, by a guy named Claudius Buchanan. It talked about spreading the gospel in India.
Okay, so his focus starts shifting eastward.
Right. And then he read another account, this one by Michael Symes, about an embassy trip to the kingdom of Ava, that's Burma or Myanmar today. And that piece really fixed his attention on Burma specifically. He just became gripped by the need there.
You can see that early drive, that ambition, starting to find a new focus. But it wasn't quite a done deal yet.
No, the moment of decision, the real commitment, he described it happening during a walk. It was February 1810.
Yeah.
And the words from the Bible, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, just hit him with this incredible force, this clarity. And he decided right then and there to obey, quote, at all events.
At all events. That phrase just sticks with you, doesn't it? Whatever it takes.
Exactly. It's that moment where his personal drive aligns with this huge, maybe even daunting purpose. That's maybe lesson one for us, right? Thinking about how our ambitions, our desires for accomplishment can connect with something bigger than just ourselves.
So powerful. Okay, so he makes this decision, and he wasn't alone. He found others who felt similarly.
Right. He teamed up with 6 other young men who also felt this burden for missions abroad. They actually went to their church leaders, the Congregationalists.
And that led to something pretty significant institutionally.
It did. It led directly to the founding of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, basically the first American foreign mission agency. And Judson was appointed as one of their very first missionaries.
Okay, but then another twist. Following that call wasn't just a straight line. On the long sea voyage to India with his first wife, Anne, he starts studying.
Yeah, he was actually studying baptism initially to kind of prepare himself to argue against the Baptist view. They expected to meet famous Baptist missionaries like William Carey in India.
Oh, interesting. So he's studying to defend his own position.
Right. But the more he studied the Bible on it, the more his own view started to change. He became convinced that the Bible taught believers baptism, baptism after a personal decision of faith by immersion.
Mhm.
And Anne, studying alongside him, she reached the same conclusion just weeks later.
Wow. So they arrive in Calcutta, and this new conviction leads to a huge, almost immediate decision.
Massive. They resigned from the American board. Just like that.
Think about that. They've just arrived there in a foreign country, and they basically cut ties with their sending organization, their support system.
Because their convictions on baptism didn't line up with the Congregationalist practice of baptizing infants, which the mission intended them to establish. It wasn't just a small theological point. It was about how they understood the church itself.
That's a really powerful example of integrity, isn't it? Sticking to what you believe based on your study, even when it costs you, like, everything, practically.
Yeah.
Lesson 2, maybe. Integrity matters, even when it's incredibly difficult.
Definitely. So picture them stranded, in a sense. But there was another missionary on that ship, Luther Rice. He'd also become a Baptist.
And he went back to the U.S.
He did, and he played a absolutely vital role. He traveled all over America telling Baptists about the Judsons and the need for missions, urging them to get involved.
And that worked.
It did. It led to the formation of the very first Baptist Foreign Missionary Society in America, and Adoniram and Anne, they became their first missionaries.
Okay, so that finally sets the stage for their arrival in Rangoon, Burma, modern-day Myanmar, in July 1813. And they were truly pioneers, the first Americans sent abroad solely to share the gospel with people who hadn't heard it.
And Burma at that time, one source calls it a missionary wasteland. Just no lasting Christian presence at all. Buddhism was incredibly deeply rooted in the culture.
Yeah, I saw that quote used to describe the difficulty. Making a convert was like drawing the eye tooth of a live tiger.
I mean, just imagine the sheer resistance implied there. It gives you a sense of the challenge they were walking into.
You can almost feel the weight of it. So faced with that, what was their approach? What did they even do first?
Well, the first most crucial step was language. They knew they had to master the Burmese language and really understand the culture. Judson poured himself into that.
Makes sense. You can't connect otherwise.
And he built something called a zayat. Think of it like a little open-sided bamboo hut. Traditionally, it was a public resting place, a spot for conversation.
Right.
He built one near his house specifically to welcome people in, build relationships, talk with them, and share his faith. He'd even go to temple grounds sometimes and engage respectfully with Buddhist monks.
So really trying to meet people where they were. But even with all that effort, the progress was slow.
Agonizingly slow. It took 12 full years.
No.
12 years before they saw even 18 people come to faith and get baptized.
12 years.
Yeah?
For 18 people. Wow. In our world today, with everything being so instant, that kind of patience, that perseverance, it's hard to even wrap your head around it.
It really is. Imagine pouring your life into something for that long with so few visible results, but they kept going.
That really hits home, doesn't it? Lesson 3. Just keeping at it, keeping your hands to the plow, as the saying goes, even when it's tough and you don't see much happening.
Although it is worth noting, the very first convert, a man named Maung Na, he was baptized fairly early on, actually, within just a couple of months of Judson starting those meetings in the Zayat. So there were some early signs of hope, but overall, yeah, the initial years were incredibly difficult fruit-wise.
And that slow work was really only one part of the hardship they faced. These sources talk about enormous suffering.
Yeah, one writer even said it makes our modern trials seem like a vacation, which is a really strong statement.
They lost children, didn't they?
Tragically, yes. 3 children died due to illness, tropical diseases, just the harsh realities of life there then. Anne had a stillborn baby. Their son Roger died as an infant, and then their little girl Maria died when she was just 2.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
And little Maria died only 6 months after her mother, Anne, passed away.
The suffering wasn't just from illness and loss, though. Maybe the most intense period for Adoniram personally was his imprisonment, right?
Absolutely harrowing. During a war between Burma and England, this was around 1824, 1825, he was arrested. They accused him of being an English spy, which was completely false. He was American, totally neutral in that conflict.
But they imprisoned him anyway, and the conditions were Brutal.
Unspeakably brutal. Sources say he was imprisoned for 19 months, some say 21. He was kept in atrocious conditions, sometimes caged like an animal, left out in the direct, scorching sun. His jailers were convicted murderers. He was beaten. And horrifically, they would hang him upside down by his feet every night.
It's almost impossible to imagine surviving that.
Mm.
And during this time, his wife, Anne, her role was just incredible.
Absolutely pivotal. She was, by every account, heroic. The sources literally say she saved Judson's life several times. Through just sheer courage and persistence. She relentlessly pleaded with the governor for better treatment for his release. She visited the prison constantly, despite the danger and difficulty. There's even a story that the governor was actually ordered to execute Judson 3 times. But Anne's bravery and the respect she somehow earned made him hesitate and ultimately spare him.
And then there's that famous story about the Bible translation manuscript.
Yes, the work he'd been pouring years into. Anne managed to hide the precious manuscript by sewing it into a hard pillow, and somehow she got that pillow to him inside the prison just to keep it safe.
Wow. It wasn't just about saving him, but saving the work, too.
Exactly. Her dedication was to both him and the mission they shared, and she was doing all this while dealing with her own incredible challenges.
Right. She wasn't just sitting around waiting.
Not at all. She was mastering languages herself. She wrote the first Christian teaching guide, a catechism in Burmese. She even translated parts of the Bible into Siamese or Thai.
And she was caring for their baby daughter, Maria, at the time.
Yes, and not just Maria. They had also taken in 2 orphan Burmese girls. So Anne was caring for 3 young children, often walking miles in the terrible heat to get to the prison, sometimes carrying Maria. Her strength just seems superhuman.
It really highlights that idea of gifts flourishing in community, doesn't it? Lesson 4. It wasn't just his brilliance, but their partnership, their shared commitment under unimaginable pressure.
Truly. But then the tragedy continued. Just a few months after Judson was finally released from that horrific imprisonment, Anne died. She was only 36. Spinal meningitis.
And then, just 6 months after losing Anne, their little daughter Maria died too.
The weight of that double loss, it just crushed him. Sources describe him entering a period of intense grief and withdrawal.
Is that when he built the Hermitage?
Yes. He went deep into the jungle, built himself a small hut, called it the Hermitage, lived on almost nothing, just a bit of rice. And incredibly, he dug his own grave nearby.
Dug his own grave.
Yeah. He stayed there for 40 days, just contemplating death, wrestling with his grief. It was a tiger-infested jungle, and apparently the local people were just amazed he even survived that period physically, let alone emotionally.
What a picture of utter despair. It's hard to imagine coming back from that place.
It is. But somehow he did. Around 1830, he emerged from that deep darkness. Not unchanged, certainly, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The work wasn't done.
And life did go on. He eventually remarried Sarah Hall Boardman in 1834. She was also a missionary, a widow herself who'd carried on her first husband's work.
So another partner who understood the life and the mission.
Absolutely. Described as a gifted partner. She knew Burmese incredibly well, translated major works like Pilgrim's Progress, wrote hymns and other catechism. She even learned the language of the Pigwan people, a distinct ethnic group, to translate for them.
Wow. Another remarkable woman.
She was, but she also faced hardship. She and Adoniram had 8 more children together, but lost 3 of them in infancy or childhood. Sarah herself died relatively young, at 41.
Just layer upon layer of loss.
And then his third wife, Emily Chubbuck. He married her in 1846. He met her while he was back in the States working on his dictionary. He actually asked her to write Sarah's biography.
Oh, interesting.
She became his companion and helper in his later years, his scribe, really. And she's the one who ultimately wrote his life story after he died. He passed away in 1850, age 62. Emily survived him.
Looking at his life, and the lives of Anne and Sarah especially, you just see this incredible, unwavering, long-term commitment through everything. Loss after loss, setback after setback.
That really stands out, doesn't it? That kind of dedication, that perseverance. It's lesson 5, maybe. It's just essential if you want to achieve anything meaningful, whether it's, your relationships or a career or a cause you really believe in. It builds character.
And speaking of long-term commitment and achievement, probably his most lasting, tangible legacy is the translation work.
Definitely. And it's important to note, as the sources do, he wasn't working in a vacuum. He built on earlier efforts. There had been Roman Catholic missionaries, other British Baptists before him who had started tackling the language.
Right. He drew on some of their work, their terminology. One source calls it an intertextual production, meaning he was kind of in dialogue with what came before.
But what he personally accomplished was still monumental. He completed the entire Bible translation into Burmese, finished it in 1840. The New Testament was done earlier, 1832.
And not just the Bible. That English-Burmese dictionary he created, it's still apparently the go-to reference work today.
Think about the sheer difficulty of that. Burmese script, with all its endless combination of hoops and circles, as one source put it, just painstaking work. It apparently really strained his eyesight over the years.
Which brings us to lesson 6, perhaps. That deep knowledge, that hard, focused work, even when it takes a physical toll, that's often what paves the way for truly lasting impact. He didn't just preach, he gave them the scriptures in their own language.
And that Judson Bible, it's still the main version used in Myanmar today. Highly respected, considered really accurate.
Okay, so all that labor, all the suffering, the slow start, what was the ultimate harvest? What did that dedicated life produce in terms of his goal of spreading the gospel?
Well, the results, when you look at the big picture, are pretty staggering. And this really speaks to that enduring legacy, glorifying God through his work. Remember, he started with basically zero enduring Christian presence.
Right, the
By
wasteland.
the time he died, about 37 years after he arrived, the work he and his wives and colleagues started had resulted in over 100 churches and something like 8,000 Burmese Christians.
Wow, from 0 to 8,000 and 100 churches in basically one man's working lifetime under those conditions. That's incredible growth.
And it didn't stop there. That legacy continued to grow exponentially.
What does it look like today?
Today, estimates suggest there are around 4.3 million Christians in Myanmar. That's about 8% of the population. And what's really fascinating is the impact among certain ethnic minority groups.
Yeah.
The Karen, the Kachin, the Chin peoples. Some of those groups became largely Christian over time. We're talking like 40% up to maybe even 95% Christian in some communities.
That's amazing. Shows how deeply the message took root in specific cultural contexts, likely building on the foundation he laid.
For sure. And culturally, his name still carries weight. You hear about families in Myanmar considering it an honor to name a son Judson. Baptist churches there have a Judson Day celebration in July.
So the astonishing fruit, as one source called it, really did grow, but it grew in that incredibly difficult soil, fertilized by the suffering and sacrifice of people like the Judsons.
Absolutely. And looking back at his whole experience, especially the imprisonment and the constant pressure, there's one more lesson that really stands out for today, I think. It's about courage.
Courage in the face of opposition.
Exactly. We hear about Christians in Myanmar facing persecution even now. Judson faced intense pressure, threats, that brutal imprisonment. His example is this powerful reminder to, well, the Bible says, not fear those who kill the body, but to stand firm for what you believe is eternally important, even when it's terrifying. That's maybe lesson 7.
Yeah. When you put it all together, the ambition, the conversion, the conviction, the suffering, the sheer tenacity in translation work, his life is such a challenge to our modern focus on, comfort and ease, isn't it?
It really is. So we've done this deep dive into Adoniram Judson's life. We traced him from that brilliant, maybe even arrogant young
Now
student
you're questioning our
to becoming this pioneer missionary, a meticulous translator, a man who endured just unimaginable personal pain, but who ultimately left this living, breathing legacy in Myanmar.
Yeah, his story isn't just facts and dates. It's really a testament to, I think, incredible resilience, a powerful love that drove him, and just this intense passion for something much bigger than himself.
And maybe the final thought is this. His life really shows that sometimes the hardest paths, the ones with all the unexpected detours and the deepest suffering, those are the very paths that lead to the most significant, the most lasting impact. So as you think about your own future, heading off to college or whatever's next, what kind of impact do you hope you can make? And thinking about Judson's commitment, that at all events moment, what level of dedication are you willing to bring to your purpose, whatever that turns out to be?